Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. We have a very special guest, Andrea Sparks, who is a director of the Anti-Child Sex Trafficking team with Governor Abbott's office, state of Texas. She is working with state and national leaders to develop and lead strategies to prevent child sex trafficking. Andrea, thank you for joining us today. And would like to ask you, can you tell us a few words about the different initiatives and programs that you are running?
Absolutely. So delighted to be here with you. So we started about 4.5 years ago when Governor Abbott appointed me and really started looking all over the country and within our own state for strategies that worked. And based on everything we've learned, we've come up with a few very high level strategies around prevention, around recognizing victims, identifying them, 'cause it's very hard to see, even if they're right in front of you sometimes. Recovering them instead of punishing them, supporting their healing, and bringing justice for them. So, under prevention, we work very closely with the schools and with child serving organizations to provide prevention education for our youth so that they can see a groomer or recruiter who is trying to manipulate them into a relationship that can turn into trafficking or exploitation. We also work to curb demand for commercial sex, because if we didn't have people willing to buy and wanting to buy our people, our human beings, for sexual purposes, we wouldn't have an issue. So we're working on curbing demand through deterring it, as well as teaching our young men that it's not okay to purchase sex, and how to be a young man without having that expectation on them. And we're also working to build up protective factors in the youth that we know are vulnerable. So, mentors, social supports, school-based supports, jobs, all of those things that help our kids stay out of exploitation. And then on recognizing, we're rolling out a screening tool for youth up to age 25, so that we can recognize those youth that are very likely to have been trafficked, and raising awareness among all the different segments of the public, as well as specialized trainings for transportation workers and Uber drivers and hotel staff, and people who are likely to come across victims. As far as recovering victims, we've really set about to create new processes so that when a child or a youth or even a young adult is picked up by law enforcement as a victim or a runaway, or picked up in a prostitution sting, for example, we know that those prostitutes are very likely victims of trafficking. So they are now referring those cases to care coordinators across the state, who literally in the middle of the night can make things happen, like SANE exams, the sexual assault exams, advocates showing up on the scene and being with that young person and helping them manage the crisis, starting to build a relationship with them, having placements ready to receive this person if they need to come live in a foster home or a safe home, or other services if they can go home, if they can go live with relatives and stay safe that way. And then, as far as supporting healing, we've been doing a lot of building capacity among our foster homes and other homes for children as well as adults, both short term and long term. We need a lot more of those. As well as, not every person needs to go live in a safe home. Many of our victims can be safe at home if they have the right support. So, one of the most important things we've done is we've developed a kind of advocacy that we're calling CSA advocacy, commercially sexually exploited youth advocates. And these advocates are very trauma informed. They meet the youth where they are, literally where they are in the hospital or in the police station, and where they are figuratively as well. So even if they don't understand that they're a victim of trafficking, that's okay. the advocate is there for them and just is building rapport and building trust. And they can stay with that child and be that support for them up until age 22. So that has been just incredible. And then lastly, bringing justice. We are doing a lot to support our law enforcement and criminal justice system, as well as make sure that our survivors are not wrongly accused and wrongly convicted of crimes that their traffickers force them to commit.
And that brings my next question as to how important is trauma informed, and what is trauma informed? What does it mean to be trauma informed, and how important it is for advocates, care teams, and for interpreters that work in those settings?
Well, it's hugely important. It's everything, because you can build the best systems and placements and programs in the world, and if they're not trauma informed, and I would say trauma responsive, then they won't work. So it's not enough to be trauma informed. It's not enough to understand what trauma does to the brain or how people are traumatized, but you have to be trauma responsive. You have to do something with that information. And what you have to do is learn how and commit to not making the trauma worse, but actually helping it go away, helping those triggers be lessened. So trauma manifests itself in a lot of ways, but in our survivors that we see, it manifests itself in fight, flight, or freeze behaviors that really impede their progress in healing. It's perfect when they're trying to survive on the street. It's perfect when they're trying to survive their trafficking situation. That's how they survive: fighting, running, and freezing, right? And just submitting to it so they don't die. But once they get into a safe place, it actually does the opposite. It makes it very hard for them to survive and to continue to heal. So by understanding that, and by knowing what to do not to make it worse, and by helping them understand their own triggers and what trauma is doing to their brain, and how they can start to self-regulate, that is huge. That's what our CSA advocates do. That's what most of our residential placements do that we fund. We are working very, very closely with Texas Christian University. They have a model called trust-based relational intervention that is working. It is working with our youth, and it's so great to see it. It's working with our adult survivors who have never received this kind of trauma-informed care before. So yes, it's super, super important.
Oh, it's wonderful, and it's very important, I guess, for everybody to learn what that means, and for interpreters that we work with, following this up with additional conversations on what does it mean to be providing trauma-informed interpreting. From what I understand, about half of the victims of human trafficking initially met their groomer or the person who got them to that predicament through social media. And a lot of the kids today are online. You see a lot of kids totally attached to their cell phone or electronic device. What can you share with families or with guardians or with kids about how can they help prevent the situation from falling into this?
Yes. So, this was already a huge phenomenon before COVID. And now that we're in COVID and kids are spending more time isolated from friends and isolated from protective factors like schools and jobs, and vulnerable people are left at home instead of getting the services they need, traffickers know this, and they are online more than ever. And we're seeing just more and more tips to the National Human Trafficking Hotline and to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children about things happening online. For example, kids were regularly approached by predators on social media and things like that, and even some games. And now we're seeing that the gaming that they do online is fraught with predators. Even some of their school that's been pushed online. So we had a case recently where a teacher was teaching her class virtually, and through a Google Doc, and a predator was able to get in and start playing some very disturbing pornographic content in front of this class of children. So they are going where the kids are. They always will. They're going where the vulnerable people are. And yes, online exploitation is growing. Many times it starts with someone pretending to be a friend or a peer, and it's actually someone who's older or not who they seem. And they'll start desensitizing the person by asking very personal questions, by sharing some personal photos, by showing some pornographic images, by getting them to do things that they know they would get in trouble, if their parents knew. And so it becomes a little secret. It becomes a little threat. And then they start asking the child to share pictures, and then they can blackmail. It's called sextortion. Them into sending more explicit photos, more explicit videos, and even meeting them in person and being trafficked.
And many kids are afraid to, I'll tell your parents or I'll expose you. They don't even know the real threat, and they don't even know if the parents may be able to help, right? So many kids are afraid of that virtual threat and are very vulnerable. So what can you do? What can one do if you suspect your friend or a child or somebody being exploited? What can you do? How can you get help?
So I would call NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They're at 1-800-THE-LOST. They're also the number to call if a child goes missing or runs away. And they have cyber analysts who do this every day. So um, every time an electronic service provider sees something that looks like child exploitation or online grooming on their platform, so Google, Facebook, anybody like that, they have to report it to NCMEC. So NCMEC is the kind of library of these things. And very often they can put together cases based on what people call in with tips. And they can also give parents lots of advice. They have a family advocacy division who works with parents. They have kids calling up now saying, oops, I sent my friend a picture I shouldn't have. Now it's all over school. What should I do? And they can really help young people and their families work through those kinds of issues.
Oh, that's wonderful, because a lot of kids take that very seriously, and sometimes situations I'm aware of, it wasn't even their picture, but somebody would post a picture and say it's you, and then it becomes a very emotionally stressful situation for a child. So that's very, very good. So 1-800-THE-LOST is the number.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you for your time, and thank you for everything that you do.
Thank
Thank
you for everything that you do. I'm so happy to be here with you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Andrea.